Welcome back. In this video, it is going to be up to you to actually wire up the ability to remove expenses from Firebase. So right now, that remove button we have in place, it just dispatches this guy, which removes the expense from the Redux store. But if I were to refresh the page, the data would still exist on Firebase and it would still show up. So it's going to be important to create an asynchronous action, one that actually wipes the data from Firebase, then dispatches this guy, similar to how we created start set expenses for set expenses and start add expense for add expense. We're going to be doing the same thing for remove, and this is actually going to be your challenge. So the entire video is a challenge video. I want you to wire everything up, so when you click that button, the expense actually does get wiped from Firebase. Now, I am going to be giving you more and more challenges. We're getting close to the end of the course, and when the course is over, I want to make sure you have the real-world experience and skill set to actually go off and build whatever it is you want to build. So you are going to do this on your own, but I will give you a little bit of guidance to make sure we're all headed in the right direction. Right here, step one is to create the new action. You can call it something like start remove expense, and it's going to have the same call signature as remove expense. It just needs the ID. Down below, we are going to make sure to test that thing with a test case like should remove expense from Firebase. And it's important to note that in order to verify that the expense was removed from Firebase, you can just try to fetch it and call val on the snapshot. And if there is no data there, it'll just have null be the return value from val. So you can use an assertion to check if it is null. Down below, we are going to make some changes to the edit expense page. That's where we were using remove expense. We want to switch that over to start remove expense. And if we are going to be adjusting the naming up above, we're also going to want to adjust the naming down below. We want to make sure that we adjust the things getting passed into edit expense page in the test cases to reflect the changes we make right here. Take as much time as you need to get that one done. Test your work, make sure the test cases pass, and check out the real application, both locally and in production, which means you are going to want to go ahead and deploy as well. Pause the video, knock this out, and when you're done, click play. How'd that one go? I'm going to start with steps 1 and 2. We're going to make sure we have the thing and that it actually works. Then we'll worry about integrating it into the rest of the application. Let's kick things off by defining our asynchronous action. It's going to be related to remove expense, so I'll toss it right below. I'm going to export a const. I'll call this one start remove expense. It is going to kick off that process, and this one is going to have the exact same call signature. We have an object with an ID property. Right here, I'll also destructure that. Perfect. Now we can set up a default if we want. Either way, it gets the job done. And then we're going to move on to the arrow in the arrow function. And in this case, we do want to set up that body. Perfect. Now this is going to be an asynchronous action, so we are going to be returning a function. This is the function that is going to do some sort of asynchronous work, in this case communicate with Firebase. Then it will dispatch a synchronous action to actually change the Redux store. Whoops, jumped around there a little too much. I meant to just highlight this guy. So we are going to take dispatch, which gets passed to this function by the Redux library, and then we're going to go ahead and do the thing we came here to do, which is to remove the expense. So I'm going to access database.ref. We're going to find that particular value, and I am going to use the ID right in here. So I'll start with a template string that is going to be expenses /. This is where we are going to inject the ID from up above. And then you needed to use remove or set. You could have used set if you wanted to, but we are going to use remove to remove the value. Next up, we are going to go ahead and return the promise, and we are going to chain something on right here. Then, once the thing is removed, all we're going to do is dispatch remove expense from up above. So I'm going to call dispatch. I'm going to dispatch whatever comes back from the remove expense action generator. And this one, once again, does take an object, and we're just going to reference the ID. So this is all we needed to do for start remove expense. Now that we have this in place, we can write a test case. If that test case passes, we'll worry about integrating it into the application. So for the test case, we want to remove one of the dummy items we actually added to Firebase. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit. Once we find the remove expense test case, I think that's sitting right here, we can add the one for the async action just below. Test. And I'm going to go with should remove expense from Firebase. We can then set up our function, and we can predict pretty confidently that this one is going to be async, so I will just define done right there. Excellent. Now down below, we can actually knock out the test case. Once again, we are going to be using the mock store, so const store equals, then we'll use create mock store to actually create that mock store because we do want to make sure everything was dispatched correctly. And the next thing we're going to do is just start that dispatch process. Now we can pick any of the expenses to actually remove. I'm going to define an ID. Let's actually toss it right below store, const ID. And I'm going to remove the last one, so the one with the index of 2. I'll access the expenses array. I'll grab the one with the index of 2, and I'm going to grab its ID. So I'm just creating an ID variable so I don't have to type this out all throughout the test case. The next thing we're going to do is actually dispatch start remove expense. So I'm going to access store.dispatch. I'm going to dispatch right here, start remove expense, and I'm going to pass to it the exact same thing we set up. So I'm going to pass to it an object with ID defined on there. Now remember, start remove expense currently does not exist in this file. We are going to have to import it up above, and things are getting pretty long. So we could go ahead and break this out into multiple lines if we wanted to. For example, we can just hit enter right after each of those. This creates something that is just a little bit easier to read, a little more sustainable. And I'll do it one last time at the end. Perfect. So we have remove expense right here. Just below it, I will add start remove expense. Excellent. Now that call is actually going to work because the thing we are using is indeed defined. Right here, we can continue on with the test case. The next thing we want to do is actually make sure that everything worked. Did start remove expense do what it should have done? We're going to add on then to wait until the process is complete. And when it is complete, we'll make all of our assertions. The first thing I need to do is grab all of those actions. So I can create a const actions, and I can use store.get actions to get the actions, something we've done every single time we've created an asynchronous test. Then I'm going to make an assertion about that first action. I can expect actions. I'm going to grab the first one, and I can use toEqual to make an assertion about what it was. Now you could have left this assertion off if you wanted to. Maybe you just asserted that the Firebase data was removed. Either way works as long as you got most of it in place. Right here, type of remove expense. And then we're also going to go ahead and set ID equal to ID from above, making sure that was the one that was actually passed in. From here, the last thing we really need to do is try to fetch the data and assert that it actually was deleted. Now I am going to return the promise here so I can chain on. I'm going to access database.ref. Once again, I am going to get a reference to that individual expenses / then I'm going to add the ID. From here, once again, I am going to use once with value. I want to get the value just a single time. Now we're not going to toss then on here to avoid complex nesting. Instead, I will attach then down below. I returned a promise, so I'll have access to that promise data right here. I have access to the snapshot, not the snapshot, the snapshot, and we're going to use the snapshot to make sure the data was actually deleted. And I mentioned that when you use snapshot.val on an item that doesn't exist, you're going to get null back. So right here, I can expect. We're going to expect something about snapshot.val. And there's a great assertion for stuff like this. It is to be falsy, and it will make sure that the assertion passes. If the value is falsy, if it's not, then this assertion will throw an error. Now null is considered falsy, so everything is going to work. And right here, all we have to do is call done. Now that we have this test case in place, we can go ahead and make sure it works before continuing on with the implementation. Over inside of the terminal, I'm going to use yarn test to run the test cases just a single time. And as long as they're all passing, we're ready to move on to actually implementing start remove expense into the component file. Right here, the test case is going through its process. Everything did complete successfully. So what we're going to do is focus on steps 3 and 4. We have this new thing. We have start remove expense. We need to make sure to use it in the edit expense page component file. I'm going to crack both of those open. Right here, we have edit expense page. That is the component file. Down below, we have the associated test file. If we're going to make a change to one, we got to make a change to the other. So the big picture goal in this one is actually not bad. We're basically just switching out the naming of certain things. So right here, for example, I'm going to switch this over to start, uppercase R, remove expense. I'm then going to take it and replace all instances of remove expense. I'm going to adjust this property name right here, which means I also want to adjust the prop setup here. And finally, I do actually want to dispatch start remove expense as opposed to just the regular remove expense action. With this in place, the file changes to this one are complete, and we can move over to the test case because currently the test case would be broken. Once again, we just have remove expense in a few different places, and we have to go ahead and tweak that. So I'm going to swap it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, down below, 5, and finally number 6. With all of those changes in place, we should be able to rerun the test suite a final time. And if things are working, I'd just like to wrap up the video by actually running the dev server. All right, there we go. Everything is still passing. Yarn, run, dev server. Let's go ahead and try to delete one of our actual expenses in the application as well. Over inside of the browser, we got localhost 8080. So we have our data showing up. And once the data actually does load, we should be able to see the delete button. And it should work. So I'm going to remove this guy, something new from site. I remove it, it goes away, but that was happening before. The real test is if we refresh the page, what happens? The item is still deleted, and it's also been removed over here. We just have our 2 expenses. The third guy was indeed removed. So that is all you needed to do to complete the challenge. You had to make changes to those 4 files. To wrap things up, we are going to go ahead and make a quick commit. If you already made a commit and you already deployed, you can just skip the rest of this video. That is literally all I'm going to do. And I'll see you in the next one right here. Git status. We got those 4 changes. Git commit with the AM flag. Setup. Start. Remove expense. I'm going to take that. I'm going to push it up to GitHub. Then I'm going to use git push Heroku master to deploy. All right, this is going to take a few seconds. There's no reason to wait for it to complete. This is the end of the video. We wired up the ability to remove the expense. In the next and final video for this section, we're going to wire up the ability to actually edit our expenses on Firebase. I'm very excited to get to that, so stay tuned and I will see you in the next video.